This is Interpreting Wine host and founder Lawrence Francis welcoming you to a special series celebrating the 30th anniversary of independently owned wine and spirit importer Louis Latour Agencies. Across these 5 episodes recorded in April 2020, you will spend time with 4 of their producers as well as hearing from agency senior management, discovering the diversity of producers in their portfolio, which includes interesting characters and wines from the new and old world, long-established producers as well as newer ones, and we'll go in-depth with cognac producer Frappan, a first for the podcast. To go along with this series, Louis Latour Agencies are very generously running a prize draw featuring a case of 6 wines from the series. To enter, you need to be on their mailing list before 9 a.m. on Monday the 15th of June 2020. The winner will be drawn and announced on the Louis Latour website on the afternoon of Monday 15th of June 2020. So do be sure to use the link below to sign up and for full prize draw terms and conditions. Today's episode of the Louis Latour Agency's 30th anniversary series features Cristina Mariana-May of Castello Banfi. She tells us the history of the founding of Banfi Wines in New York, before taking us on a virtual tour of Montalcino and the estate known as Castello Banfi. At Castello Banfi, wines are only a part of the story, with only a third of the property planted in vines, meaning this is a site of study, exploration, collaboration, as well as great beauty. She then leads a tasting of 2 Castello Banfi wines, a 2018 Vermentino and the 2015 Brunello di Montalcino. Enjoy!
I'm really excited because I am a 3rd-generation family member in Banfi, and our company actually started back in 1919. So this year we're celebrating a 101-year anniversary of being in the wine business, which is great because it's hard to succeed sometimes in family businesses for so many years, but it's been a business that we've all loved dearly, which is food and wine. The inspiration in the founding of the company is a great story because the company was founded by my grandfather. His name was John Mariani, and he founded it in Greenwich Village of New York City back in 1919. But when he was a little boy, he was raised in Italy by his aunt Teodelinda Banfi. And Teodelinda Banfi was an amazing woman in the history of the Vatican and the Catholic Church, but also in our family. She was, at the time, she was the head of the household for the Archbishop of Milan. And the Archbishop of Milan, Achille Ratti, was then elected to become Pope Pius XI. So he had to move from Milan down to the Vatican. But at the time, no women were allowed to live within the Vatican walls. But so he had a special dispensation pass, so Teodelinda could be the very first female moving into the Vatican. And as such, she ran the entire household. So from the food, the wine, the guests, his personal life, his robe choice, whether it was white or red or white. And she passed away there. And she was honored to be the first woman to be buried within the Vatican City as well. So it's an amazing history because she raised my grandfather because she was so well educated and traveled. And he came back to America in 1919 and started importing products from Italy and named the company Banfi after his aunt who he loved like a mom. So that's why it's a great history of many years of love of wine, food, and hospitality.
To me, that's obviously hugely important for the naming, but, I sense as well in the culture and just in the approach of everything that you've done going forward as a company. And I just wonder, you're really enjoying this and maybe just continue on. What were the next sort of steps? How did things move on post the founding of the company over in New York?
Yes. So the founding of the company, it is ironic because it was founded in 1919 and the next year was the Prohibition in America. So we were founded amongst hardship. So speaking now currently of what we're going through with the COVID-19 and bringing it back to I'm an Italian American who lives between two hotspots, New York and Italy, and we are in the center of it. And I just want to bring it back to relevance because, I think how the company was founded and we had to survive. My grandfather had to survive making the Amaro or the bitters in our garage in order to sell them in the pharmacies as digestives or laxatives, really. And they sold like hotcakes. So I think it's a good lesson for all of us to have that inspiration of being creative, of being innovative and research and never giving up. Because there's times in this environment and in family businesses, and especially in this world now, where a lot of people might not by force to give up, but by choice say, you know what, I'm going to move on to a new venture. And I think this is where the passion and the heart and the soul of the wine industry particularly comes through. So most people, we do this not just because it's a job, we do it because we love it, right? And wine is people, passion, food, travel, but those are all the things that are getting hard hit right now. Not so much wine, but the lifestyle is getting hit. So we survived through that as a company, and then we became very successful as wine importers in America, which is why I'm right now based in my office in New York, where my 3 teenage children are homeschooling. But it was in 1978 that my father had a vision as an Italian American to create a wine estate from scratch. And most Italian Americans were either going to California at the time in the 1970s to develop estates, or they were, growing their import business. It was very bold and brave that he instead went back to Italy. So we settled in a region of Montalcino, which is southern Tuscany. It was known at the time for a Brunello di Montalcino, but in 1978, Brunello di Montalcino was not what it was today. Actually, in 1978, Montalcino was the poorest hilltop town in southern Tuscany, and their main welfare was collecting kindling of wood for fire. So it was not wine. So we had a lot of foresight to go in, work with top agronomists, winemakers, and scientists to start from scratch. We didn't buy an existing estate because when we looked at that, Lawrence, there was a lot of inherent baggage from generations. And you can imagine being Italian American coming into a sleepy village in southern Tuscany, and they said, well, this is how we do it here. And you have to age in cement vats, and you have to have mold in your wine, and you have to trellis the vineyards this way. And we said, well, here we are. Well, we're worldly, and we said, well, what if we try it a different way? And rather than swim upstream, we decided to build a wine estate from scratch. And that was the founding in 1978 of Castello Banfi. And it became, Lawrence, a 2,800 hectare agricultural property. It's not just vineyards, it's plums and olive groves and cherries and pasta we make from our own wheat. But it's the viticulture and the wine, which became very pioneering and experimental for, it had a lot of foresight. And this is what we have today at Castello Banfi. So we continue to push and innovate and try to do things better and raise all standards of Italian winemaking.
Okay, yeah, I love it. And I think that will really, I think through the wines that you've selected for us to try today, it will be great to get that. Yeah, I call it the virtual tour, I think as all of those things that you mentioned that wine is, I also always have this kind of romantic notion that it's almost like a teleporter as well. It can transport you both in geography, but then also back in time. It's like the best sort of time machine that exists. But I guess really before we kind of, really, as I say, get into the soil, get into the climate, get into the glass, I'd really just love to hear, from all of those origins, bring us like right up to date in terms of like what does your current sort of I guess, A, the business look like, and B, your kind of day to day. But I guess then there's also that third point that I think is also really exciting sounding, which is, something towards that innovation that you've had to really bring out and live in the wake of the crisis that we're sort of all living through at the moment.
Sure. So, it's always been an uphill climb for us in Montalcino to pioneer and do research. So it's kind of in our DNA to go outside of our comfort zone. And also to think very globally. So when we think of the current environment and the crisis we're going through, because we're New Yorkers, which is like London, and it's kind of the center of the world sometimes, we have to think outside, and we think of the 90 different countries we sell to. So we wear many hats. The one thing, though, we realized when we went in is that we can never rest on the laurels. We have to constantly research and develop in order to not only improve the wines, but with the climatic changes, the market changes that we're seeing, the wines are constantly evolving. So one thing that has been fascinating, and I'm not a scientist or a winemaker, I work with them, I'm an owner, but is that we took all these grape varieties that were noble French varieties, the Sangiovese for the Brunello, and in the 1970s, we really began micro-vinifying each one in single vineyards and experimenting with them. Trying, from Syrah to Merlot to, the Cabernet Sauvignon to Chardonnay, but even Pinot Noir, Nebbiolo, things that were not typical Tuscan. We actually make a Pinot Grigio, and we were the first to do so in all of Tuscany, because at the time, the Italian government wouldn't even recognize it. So we made our San Angelo, and they said, oh, Pinot Grigio can grow in Tuscany. Look, somebody has to try. And I think it's because of our vision, but also because we have a large estate. With 2,800 hectares, only 1/3 is planted to vineyards. Yeah. So we were able to get the University of Milan, University of Pisa, University of Bordeaux. They all came down to our one location to do all this analysis, where in the past you had to go to different properties throughout the country or consortios of growers to get such diversity. So Castello Banfi was so unique because it's such a large estate. We had that diversity in soil and microclimate, terroir, in order to experiment with such a range of wines, really unheard of before in Italy. Yeah. On top of it, too, which brings the romance, because we have to paint the picture of Tuscany, because we're all trapped inside right now. So let's paint a painting of what Tuscany is like. Southern Tuscany, I believe, is one of the most beautiful historical regions of all of Italy. One of the main regions, of course, for the beauty of Italy is the Belle Arti Committee. The Belle Arti is the protection of the historic buildings in the zone. So the zone of Montalcino falls under the Belle Arti. So every structure, every tree, every stone house has to be preserved. You wind up the rolling hillside to over, 2,800 hectares up to a climbing hill to the 12th century castle, which is today Castello Banfi. It was actually historically called Poggio alla Mora, which is the walled hilltop. And Montalcino is just south of Siena and south of Florence, but the zone of Montalcino was constantly in the 1500s a warring faction, a territory between Siena and Florence, and they would fight each other. And Montalcino stayed as kind of the Switzerland in the middle until eventually it fell under the territory of Siena. And the castle was actually a 12th century fortress, and it was gifted to the knight Conte Placido, who was given the castle as the fortress. Today, we've rechristened it Castello Banfi, but it is still historically Poggio alla Mora, or the walled hilltop. So hopefully we can, paint this picture, but it's a beautiful tower overlooking valleys and hills and vineyards. And now we have, it's one of the most spectacular, beautiful sights that I could paint a picture of, to be honest. And really, I think the wines of Montalcino and Banfi try to capture that beauty as well. So that's where we are today. I mean, it's a unique time, as I said, with the hospitality. We have a hotel called Il Borgo, which is a Relais and Chateau property in the castle, but unfortunately it's closed for the season right now because of Italy being under close, watch. But it was rated one of the 7th best resort in all of Italy, and it's only 14 luxury suites. So when we get an opportunity for all of your listeners to travel again, you have to promise you'll come down and taste the wines and stay at the Borgo, because it's beautiful. But we continue to work on research. Sustainability is a big philosophical belief of ours. And that doesn't stop, even among this current crisis. That goes on and on. If anything, this crisis allows us time to think and work more diligently in the vineyards, because that's one place where it's open space and we're essential. But to work in the vineyards in order to continue to develop and research the best ways to produce the highest quality wines.
As I say, you've, I think, given a wonderful description there, and it's definitely representative of what I've seen and what I've come across. And I think what is always very interesting to me as well, where you've got, I'm sure, lots of incredible properties like that around the world that are in different uses, but where properties like that are being used for wine production, I always find that the owner is able to actually have a greater awareness than normal, really, or not more than average, than what's going on underneath. Because I think that's really the next part that I'd invite you to kind of, again, take us out of our houses and out of where we might be now, and give us that sort of virtual tour, but start to look under the soil and tell us about what's kind of going on under there, and what might have been discovered by some of those research projects that you mentioned, and then potentially talking to some of the climate as well, because I'm sure that will also affect the nature of what's under the soil as well.
Sure. So that's a very interesting question, Lawrence, because actually what's under our soil used to be all underground ocean and sea. So we're at about 300 to 600 meters above sea level in Montalcino, and we very much vary according to, the vineyard plot. But constantly we have archaeologists going through our vineyards and coming to our property, and they're constantly looking at the soil and digging deep and finding fossils and seashells, because where we are in the center of Tuscany used to be an inland sea over 5, 6, 7 million years ago. And about 5 years ago, the archaeologists were digging, and we have what is in Tuscany a very typical type of soil, which is the clay soil as well, the crete it's called. And in the heavy spring rains, the crete can fall off in parcels, breaks apart from the hill. And the archaeologists found a lot of ancient shark teeth fossils. They found such a high concentration that they knew to dig deeper. So they're like, okay, if there's so many shark teeth, what were the shark? Why were they here, and what were they munching on? So they dug a little deeper, and I'm only talking maybe 5 meters below the topsoil, and they found a whale vertebrae. And they kept unearthing it. They found the incomplete whale laying down to rest in what is now our vineyards, that was over 10 meters long, and it was discovered to be 5 million years old. So when people say, what makes this soil unique, and particularly unique for Sangiovese, for the Brunello di Montalcino, is a lot of limestone and calcium in the soil. And a lot of that is from these fossilized shells. I mean, we often say when you taste our Brunello, you taste a little bit of that whale blubber in the nose, because I'm like, no, literally, there is whale. It's that maritime warm Mediterranean climate.
A new tasting note on me.
Yeah. So see if you taste a little fishy, salty whale. It's not often we get to eat it and enjoy it. We haven't had sushi in a while under COVID-19, so. But that's kind of what lays under our soil. But of course, with the climate constantly changing, and this whale fossil 5 million years old is a perfect example of how Italy used to be under the water, and now here we are getting very hot, dry summers, lack of water, and we are growing vines now that are more and more heat resistant. Because the importance of that is, we need these hardy vineyards to be able not to get sunburnt. And, irrigation and natural irrigation is very important for all the vines as well. So it's really a constellation of single vineyards because there's 29 different types of soil on our estate, which is a huge diversity. So each one is planted with a different varietal and, of course, a different clone of the varietal. So I mentioned before how at Banfi we were the first to plant Pinot Grigio in Tuscany. And for 3 years, the government said it had to be labeled as a Vino da Tavola. And after 2 vintages, we proved the varietal characteristics so it could be labeled as a Pinot Grigio. What we find is we have such a range that the whites are growing well in the valley where there's less elevation. So we experiment, we'll have later the Vermentino, a Chardonnay, Pinot Grigio. And then when you climb up the hills into different types of rocky, gravel, clay soils, we produce at the better, higher elevations the Sangiovese and, of course, a beautiful Cabernet and Merlot, which are very versatile grapes to grow, to be honest. Cabernet and Merlot are like, baking an easy cake, and making a Sangiovese is like trying to do, a souffle. It's when we're talking about home cooking in this era, I can make a cake from a mix. That's all good. But try to make a chocolate souffle by yourself when you're not a good chef and you're a working mom and CEO, near to impossible. So
social distancing as well.
Oh, yeah. At least we only have to eat it ourselves, right? Our family and friends still love us.
Exactly. Okay, I love it. And yeah, I actually, watching and hearing you talk about a third of the property being in vines really kind of took me back to my origins with the podcast. And I remember there was a Carver producer, I believe it was Torello over in Penedès, and they were talking about, I think roughly the same, around a third of the property was in vines. And it was a huge revelation to me at the time. And I think it's always interesting to kind of, get your take on the 2/3 that's not in vines. What's going on there? What might we see were we to again, take a stroll around the property when we're able to travel over?
Well, if you come between October and February and you stroll through the non-vineyards, you might come across the local hunters with their shotguns shooting the cinghiali, which are the wild boar. So I warn you, it's true. So a lot of it is a hunting preserve because a lot of it is still forested. And at Banfi, we're very proud that we've actually planted enough trees back on the property to pave the roads from Siena to Florence. So we have one of the highest ratios of forestation to cultivated agriculture in all of Italy. So that's very rare because actually Banfi is the largest contiguous property in all of Italy. There is no larger property. So what we need to protect is the natural habitat. So almost, of that 2/3 that are not vineyards, the majority of that is forest. where we cultivate non-grapes down in the valley floor is we also are one of the largest producers of plums, and we dry them at our pruning factory and we supply them to the European community. So where the vineyards don't grow, the plum trees prosper, and the season is slightly different with the harvest as well as with the olives for the olive oil that we cultivate. So because that's a later harvest in November. We also use a lot of the land for the cultivation of a durum wheat, where we make our own organic pasta. We have cherries, which we grow. And as I said, the rest is just beautiful paths to take a bicycle on and walk through, and just don't do it after having a big meal with lots of Brunello and Super Tuscans, because you will make it down the hill but never back up, because it is very hilly where we are. So you have to have one of those new bikes that have the electric motor.
I love it. Yeah, it just sounds horrible.
It's rough. I mean, somebody has to take that bike ride through the vineyards, you know. At the Castello Banfi estate, we're really dedicated to the utmost quality of wine. So we find that our vineyards are maxed out as far as production of the land, because a lot of the rest of the land is not able to be cultivated for high quality wine producing. We do in Italy have different vineyards throughout the country, some in Chianti Classico, some in the Maremma along the Tuscan coast, up in Piemonte, where we produce different wines, and some for everyday IGT. But in Montalcino, we really try to get the lowest ratio, highest density plantings in order for the quality to ensure. So that's really a personal choice as a producer. But also, we are maxed out on the rights to produce Brunello di Montalcino, because you have to get those from the Italian government. So Montalcino as a territory is planted out as far as your rights for Brunello. It's quite interesting, because about 8 years ago, you could trade rights between different zones of Italy. So let's say, for example, I had extra land in Montalcino and I wanted to plant it to Sangiovese for Brunello. I could go buy a vineyard in Sicily and say, with that vineyard, I bought rights and I'm going to transfer those back to Tuscany. We can no longer do that because it's a protection of the zones now. So Montalcino is very, very strict on protecting the DOCG, the denomination of controlled origin and garantita, protecting the zone. So we are fully planted out on our Sangiovese for Brunello, but on the others, we prefer not to. And remember, you want to rotate the soil. You want to sometimes plant it with cherries or wheat to let it lay fallow. And I think it's really important, because that's the quality. And one thing at Banfi that I'm proud of is that we want high quality wines, but we also want affordable luxury. It's affordable. I do not want to make a Brunello that's going to be priced only at $300 or 300, pounds a bottle. Yeah. Because honestly, consumers around the world might cherish that at an auction, but how often are you really going to drink that? And what we try to do at Banfi is, because of the size of the estate and the range and the pioneering efforts we've done, is to have a wine in different price categories. And I think even more so now that we're in this global crisis, it's very important to have your top wines to show the top scores and what you can do. But we need everyday wines. We need wines where you can crack open now, drink, not break the bank, and know that there's still quality made. And that's something that I think, because of the size of our estate, our technology, our innovation at Castello Banfi, we're very proud we can offer it all.
And yeah, I think this is now, you've given us the perfect segue now to talk about how all of that history, all of that terroir, all of that amazing scenery, and I think also that approach to sustainability and leaving the earth to recover, leaving it to be planted to different things. What does that then show up, and how does that then show up in the glass? So you've selected 2 wines for us to try today. So I believe we're going to be starting with a Vermentino. So talk us through, I guess, where is this growing? What is the sort of conditions? And then how does that then show up in the glass?
Sure. So Vermentino traditionally was grown in Italy, in the southern quarters of Italy. So Sicily, Sardinia, it's very famous for being a coastal white. It's also grown in Bordeaux and in France as well. But when it comes to Italy, we find the maritime Mediterranean climate is very conducive to balancing in a Vermentino the crisp acidity with some exotic tropical fruit. So where we are, so we're not in the deep south of Italy, we're in central, but as we said, with the climatic changes, it's feeling like the deep south. So what we do is we grow some of the Vermentino grape along the Tuscan coastside, which is the Maremma. So the Maremma is just south of Florence, between Florence and Rome, along the Mediterranean coast. And we have some vineyards there where we grow the Vermentino. It's very flat, coastal, with warm days and semi-warm nights. And then we also grow some up in the hillside of Montalcino. So Montalcino is only about 20 kilometers from the Mediterranean Maremma coast to the ocean, or to the sea. But when you go up to the higher elevation and you start getting different soil textures, down by the coast, you get a little sandstone and gravel. When you go up into the hills, it's more limestone calciferous. So we blend it from the two. And what I love particularly about this wine is we often say it's a very fresh, summertime wine. But one of my favorites is the name, because I have to tell you the name, because people say Pettegola, Pettegola. So we kind of had a play on it. It's a very Tuscan term. And Pettegola is actually the name, a Tuscan dialect for the birds that fly up and down the seacoast. And they're like sandpipers, kind of. And they fly up and down and they go, and they chirp along the way. Well, in Tuscany, when you have a lot of women that are sometimes older, sometimes younger, sitting around the piazzas, talking all day long and gossiping of the local romances and divorces, especially in COVID, who knows what's happening, they are called the Pettegola, because we women have a tendency to gossip just like the birds sound. So we sit around all day going, and as we do that, we have to drink more and more Pettegola Vermentino. As we do, we have a tendency to talk a little more. So that's why
it's a virtuous circle.
Exactly.
The more feeding off each other very nicely.
The more Vermentino we have, the more we tend to let down our guard. But that's why we put the wine in a pink capsule as well for we women.
Okay.
So what I have here, Lawrence, is a screw cap. Do you have yours in a screw cap or a cork?
I didn't actually. I had the 2018, which is under cork.
Oh, under cork. Okay.
Yeah.
Here in America, we have it in screw cap.
Okay.
So.
But it's the same year you've got this, 2018?
2018.
Okay.
So this 2018 Pettegola Vermentino is 100% fermented in stainless steel, no oak, so it's meant to be a very crisp wine. As you taste it, what I love about Vermentinos, for people who have not had them, is that I think they're a beautiful balance almost between an unoaked Chardonnay and a little taste of like a Sauvignon Blanc. That little bit of grassy grapefruit citrus. And that's how I like to get people to try the Vermentinos. Because if you like a Chardonnay, but you don't want that heaviness, but you don't want that over acid sometimes of a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, or Puy-Fusé, those are gentler. But what I would say is something like a Vermentino is a delicious combination.
I think you're absolutely nailing it in terms of the descriptions. I think it always stands out to me where you've got a large area, and those sort of micro terroirs really, and those different growing conditions where you're able to select and blend the two together. And I think that always stands out to me as a great approach and a really a sustainable approach to getting balance, because you'd imagine that the growing conditions potentially are quite different in those two areas, but that between them you've got a better chance, really. I guess you've got another tool in your kit box as a winemaker to make a wine which does kind of bring back into balance. And I think the point that kind of stands out to me is, and again it grows on and comes out of you describing the area and it potentially being quite a warm area. I think it's always amazing when you do get a wine from areas that are quite warm, but then do the things that you've mentioned there. They are crisp, they are refreshing. This has got, for me, an amazing sort of salinity, minerality, whatever people want to call it, on the finish as well, which again, it is very much a wine that you could have on any sort of day, really, but you could have it, as you say, sitting around with friends having a gossip, but then equally I think you could get quite some interesting, I'm sure, the regional cuisine and the seafood, and I'm sure there's some incredible matches that can go with food, as I know is the culture very much in Italy, to always have something at your side to nibble on while you're having your wine.
Yeah, food and wine has to go well, go together, because it's hard to have it alone. But when you pair, they have the Pettegola, the Vermentinos very often at the bars along the coast. So you have it as an aperitivo, you have it with the seafood, you have it light and crisp, but it is by the glass. I mean, I like to have it when I come home every evening for the briefing, from whether you have it from the Prime Minister, well, he's not briefing right now, but the State Department, and we have Donald Trump here. You need some wine to take down his speeches. So sitting and listening to him, and then hearing the news from my colleagues in Italy, who you just, my heart goes out for, because Italy is so passionate and they're full of love and pride. And so the Vermentino is the wine that is my go-to every day by the glass. And makes everybody happy. It's got more character and depth than a Pinot Grigio, which people still like light. We don't want to get weighed down in this time of being at home and have very heavy things, because we're very sedentary. When you have something like a Vermentino and the Pettegola, it's energetic, it's crisp, it doesn't weigh you down. Yeah. And that's what I personally love about it. But then when you pair it with the food, it can go through the entire meal. Takeout, spicy, if you guys do a lot of Thai, anything like that would be actually delicious.
As you will have heard before, we're going to be trying two wines today. So having now had the Vermentino, we're going to now move across to the famous Brunello di Montalcino. We're trying the 2015. So in the same way, I really enjoyed your descriptions there. Take us into the glass here and show us and talk to what's showing up there.
Okay, so when we had the Vermentino, we were on the coast more. Now you're coming into the ancient, historic, medieval village of Montalcino, which is a hilltop town just south of Siena. It is one of the most beautiful, historic, and now today it's the most famous, probably, red wine growing region in all of Italy. Let me paint the picture a little bit, because when we came in 1978, as I said, it was a very poor town. It was mostly sharecroppers that were either growing their own house grapes, or there was a small amount of wine made by Biondi Santi, of course, who was the first cultivator and vintner to make a Brunello di Montalcino. Brunello di Montalcino has to be made from 100% Sangiovese grape, and the Sangiovese grape must be grown within the designated territory. It has to be aged for 4 years by law before release to the market, and 2 of those years must be in wood. When we first came into Montalcino in 1978, the regulation was 4 years aging in wood. You can imagine if it wasn't quality vines that you were pulling splinters, literally pieces, chunks of wood out of your mouth. And you really could not drink the wine without food and at the current vintage. You had to age it for decades. Well, fast forward to today, who has the patience? Who knows what's going to be here in decades? So our philosophy is drink it now. So we came into the territory and we said, okay, let's experiment with the Sangiovese grape so we can make a Brunello that is much more approachable, much softer in tannins, and that consumers around the world will be able to enjoy sooner. So a lot of times people say, well, is that a modern Brunello? You're like, well, there's traditional Brunellos and modern Brunellos. But to be honest, today, most vintners in Montalcino are making contemporary Brunellos, which means you can enjoy it today, but it keeps getting better and better with age.
Yeah.
Now, as we talk through this, Lawrence, it's not easy to make a Brunello, as I was saying. This is my chocolate souffle that I'm trying to perfect, right? Sangiovese is one of the most finicky grape varieties that grows. It's very comparable to Pinot Noir. So think about the different versions of Pinot Noir you taste, what zone of Burgundy, or whether you're tasting a Californian Pinot Noir, totally different, or New Zealand Pinot Noir, totally different. Because Pinot Noir and Sangiovese really quickly mutate to the microclimate. So Sangiovese is known as going into Chianti and Chianti Classico. But when you taste the Chiantis, they can be blended with up to 15% of another grape variety. So traditionally it used to be white wine. Now it's Cabernet usually, or very fleshy, round fruit. Brunello can't, 100% Sangiovese. So what we did at Banfi was we said, okay, let's do some research on the clones of Sangiovese that will make a more outstanding Brunello. No single producer in Italy had ever done any research work on this. This is not a simple task. It's still ongoing, but it took us originally about 20 years. What we did was we had the scientists and agronomists from all over the world, from Chile, Bordeaux, Italy, come into our estate. We planted micro-tested vineyards of 650 different clones of Sangiovese. That is one of the largest clonal grape variety families that exists.
Yeah.
There's very few grapes have that many types of variations. We narrowed it down, vinify, characteristics. We narrowed it down first to 180 clones and then to 15 that we felt best represented characteristics for a Brunello di Montalcino, but a Brunello di Montalcino in the contemporary style. So meaning one clone, and it wasn't one clone that's a super clone. Like some people think that Sangiovese Grosso is the only clone in Brunello. That's just one of them. There's actually 15. One clone's good for acidity. One's good for deep color. One's good for tannic structure. So what we found was 3 to 4 different clones planted in a vineyard brought the best variation, stability, beauty in the wine. And what we did was we found these 15 clones, and of them, something just popped up. Of the 15 clones, what we did was we registered those with the Italian government. So in Italy, there's 45 nationally registered clones of Sangiovese. And we're very honored to be the first and only producer to offer 15 of those clones were founded by Banfi. So the secret in the philosophy, I should say, it's not even a secret. It's not a secret at all. It's a thinking of giving back was, okay, we had the resources, the land, the financial resources to do this 20-year project. Now we have to share it. So we documented it all. We put it in books. We put it on, radio before podcasts. We shared it with the universities. So today, most of the producers in Italy are using the Sangiovese clones that were founded by Banfi. And what that says is, if we make a better Brunello, all ships are going to rise with the incoming tide. And if we share, they'll make a better Brunello. And now today, there's been a renaissance since 1950s in Montalcino. And now today, Brunello and Montalcino is one of the most acclaimed wine-growing regions of the world. So we're very proud because those are the grapes that go into our own Brunello and our neighbors.
As you say, it is a complete first, that dedication to, if you like, whittling down all of those different clone types and getting down to the 15. And I'm sure just that process would be a podcast in and of itself. But I'm just curious to get a flavor, a sense of that. I guess what must have been the interaction between palate and history and, as you say, market tendency and style, and I'm sure technology as well. Just, a sense of flavor, sort of a highlight reel of that process, I think would be great to hear at this time.
Sure. So when you have to micro-vinify each vineyard, and each vineyard is going to be very diversified, and each clone, what we did learn is technology plays an important part. A lot of times we say, oh, it's all agriculture. Well, the grapes is the most important. But it's also how you micro-vinify it in the winery that has a lot of influence on Brunellos because, again, they're 4 years spent in the winery. What we did at Banfi and we learned is if we can take in individual vineyards, we actually created a new microvinification area with hybrid fermenters that are half wood, half stainless steel. And these were patented at Banfi. No one in Italy had ever really thought about bringing the best of fermenting in stainless, which is the temperature control, the cleanliness, the ease of use. But fermenting in wood is so elegant and soft, particularly on the Sangiovese tannins, which can get very harsh. So how do we do both? So we actually got together the engineers and the wood barrel makers, and they had always seen themselves in competition, and we gave them a good glass of Brunello. I think we gave them a few bottles. And what happened, just like the Pettegola, they start sitting around, they become friendly over the table, and they start drafting a new prototype for a hybrid tank. We tried them at Banfi. We tried them starting with the outstanding 2007 vintage, and lo and behold, they soften the tannins, they bring out the beauty of the wine, and we've been using them ever since. And again, technology innovation, we shared the patent now is on the open market, so a lot of winemakers are now using those tanks. So that's a big, big part of it because it really does happen in the winery and what type of wood you use and how you age it. We age it in the large Slavonian casks, but the fermenters are actually French oak barrique. So, the blend of the wood, the amount of time, all of that has an influence. And as you know, Lawrence, that changes vintage by vintage. It's a moving target. When we have Sangiovese, that is a Brunello di Montalcino, as this is our 2015 vintage we're tasting, so this is the current vintage, which was a 5 out of 5 star, an amazing vintage for us, perfect conditions. But what you get often is kind of a vibrant cherry note on the nose and kind of plum and cherry, and a little bit maybe a violet flowers. And I love it. It's a lively nose. It's on the palate. When you taste it, what I love about Sangiovese is that it really dances on your tongue. You know what I mean? It's got this acidity and an energy that keeps you thinking and awake. Your palate becomes awake. It's not a heavy wine, but it's like a deep, woodsy berry fruit, but that vein of acidity and structure is what makes Brunellos kind of so special and very much, these are food wines, don't get me wrong. This is, you got to pair this with your cinghiale that you killed out in the vineyards, in the woods, but like a boar stew, Simple grilled meat. Let's bring it back home. Who's eating cinghiale right now? Try a hamburger on the grill. Is probably more like it. But this is just a wine to me that is pure, noble Tuscan.
A couple of things that I picked out from the tech sheet of this, which I thought really stood out, and I highlighted. One was that phrase, meditation wine. It says it's perfect as a meditation wine. And then a second element that I highlighted was first produced in 78, which is my year, actually is my birth year. So I was just curious and thought there might be some connection there. Like, what is this sense of a meditation wine? Because it is something that I have come across speaking with Italian producers before, but I don't feel we'll ever necessarily nailed a definition of that. And then also a nod to how do these wines change and evolve over time.
Yes, so we all have a different definition of meditation, but how I consider this a meditative wine is that it evolves very much so in the glass as you're drinking it. And really complex red wines will do that. Think of a Burgundy. It's the same thing. When you open it and you first taste it, you're getting a lot of vibrant fruit. But if you go back and taste it 10 minutes later, 5 minutes later, you're getting these softer velvet tannins. When you go back 20 minutes later, you're getting that long elegance. And so really, while we say it's meditative, is because it's lengthy, it's evolving. So, and it makes you kind of think, like, wow, this is a living creature in this glass. This is what wine's all about, and like, I love to say, Lawrence, that how when you're on vacation, and let's pretend, okay, we're in Tuscany, and we're on the back patio watching the sun over the cypress trees set, and we're having a glass of Brunello, and we're having a piece of Parmigiano Reggiano or Pecorino, and you look and everything just tastes alive, it's just vibrant. And you look at your significant other, and I've been married a long time. So I look at my husband and I think, wow, he really is gorgeous. He's aging so beautifully, like, I'm in love. This is just magic. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Fast forward a week, you're back in your kitchen, COVID-19 lockdown, 3 kids in the house, and there's the same husband and the same wine on your counter. You better believe me, you're barking at him to take out that goddamn garbage. And that Brunello tastes sharp. It doesn't taste, And I always compare it that it is your setting. It is the environment. It is, as you started, it is that escape where everything is peaked. And that's why this wine is meditative. Because let me tell you, if you take it home with the screaming kids and have a glass while rushing through a takeout dinner, it doesn't taste the same way. And that's what is the fun of it. Yeah. It's not. It's different every time. So
I love the descriptions. I love the relevance of it, and I agree. I just think so often we say, oh, it tastes different now. Whatever the wine might be, or the spirit we buy, or even sweets and chocolates and confectionery. But I don't know. I think, relating to your story there, and maybe that there are hopefully some people who are finding a little bit of space at the moment as well, is it's like taking the time. We very much in this country, as I'm sure happens in America as well, is to rush through the act of eating and quick lunches on the go and lunches at the table, and I think that I like your description there of the meditative nature. And I think for me, the big word that jumps out of that is time. It's like, okay, this is a wine that you need to spend the time with to enjoy those different sort of iterations of it as you're going across the evening, but also in the moment of actually tasting and having it in your mouth and actually noticing and saying, oh, okay, that cherry has changed now and it's come out, or something that was there at the very start. Like I was picking up something that I almost would a lot I noticed as like a balsamic note almost at the start, and that's completely gone now. And that was, as you say, a couple of hours ago, and it's on its moment. But the point there being, I think, in that moment of actually having it there, you've got to have the time to give yourself. It might just be the seconds to notice those changes, but those seconds really make all the difference. And as you say, with screaming kids running around and no time to just enjoy and close your eyes and get closer to that, then it's well worth it. I think, just investing that time to just, go looking for those differences and those nuances that I think really do show up.
Yeah, I mean, this is a perfect lockdown wine, because if you are on lockdown, we do have time in the evening. If we turn off the computer, and what I'm big into now is puzzles, and I can't get enough of them. And I have one of a gelateria in Toscana, so I crave the ice cream, and I sit and I can have a glass of Brunello, and that's the perfect setting. You take it slow, with a meal, but even without, it's a patience wine, and we do have time now. We're being forced to take time to stop and to enjoy our friends in video Zooms and sit with our kids and play Monopoly, and that's when the Brunello is most special. And, a lot of Brunellos still do need time to age. A lot of people say, how long should I age my Brunello? And they say, 5 to 10 years. But honestly, because of all of our research and development we've done at Castello Banfi, we're trying to make a wine now that can be enjoyed today. So what I recommend when you get a Brunello is you don't have to put it down for months, but open the bottle before you're going to drink it. Open it in an hour, open it in your kitchen, even a day before. Think about tomorrow night. Have a little, cork it, get some air in there, let it sit, come back to it for a few days, and you're going to talk about like a change, a metamorphosis. It's fascinating. And you'll see different characteristics come every day. And that's the best way to have a Brunello, really.
Yeah, again, thank you so much for that description. And I genuinely do feel that through tasting this wine with you, I am traveling and I am there over in Tuscany. So I can totally picture and feel what that might be like. I think we're really in closing. I mean, I just would ask you to look ahead, really. I mean, I know that the effects of lockdown and the effects of COVID-19 are probably, are everybody's short-term and near future, no matter where we might be around the world. And there's obviously a lot of those things that are outside of our control. But I think also, maybe talk also to the things that are more within your control as a company and as a region and potentially, what are the things that you're excited to share, and I guess you're anticipating maybe when things start to get back to normal.
Well, first and foremost, I look forward to welcoming everybody back to Tuscany because the travel and the experience, and we're very proud of our hospitality at Castello Banfi with the winery, the balsameria, the hotel, the restaurants, the wine tours. That's how you truly fall in love with the wine, because a wine is not, as you said, Lawrence, it's not just what's in the glass, it's the entire experience. And so, first and foremost, I look forward to having people back on the estate and interacting with them, because wine is a very personal medium. It's about people, friends, meals, and I can't wait for that to happen again. So, and it will, it's coming. So that's number one. Number two, on the winemaking side, what we have to use this time is to continually research and develop. Like, how can we be making our wines in a better style? How can we be doing trellising better, pruning, all the things that can happen in the vineyards that so greatly affect the wine? We are experimenting with more and more because that's where our focus is right now. But when I look for the future, what I want to be honest, continue to do is to make wines that are Tuscan in character, but consumers can afford to appreciate around the world. I have always believed in this as a CEO and as an owner, but I said it has to be approachable. It has to be approachable in style, approachable in price, and this philosophy, the storytellers, the people who are connected with the wine have to be approachable. And we have to get back out there in every way possible to bring that passion of Italy with a little spice of a New Yorker mixed in, and we have to get that back out there because there will always be a love for all things Italian. The Italians do everything in style. I mean, I hear the Gucci face masks are the most trendy thing. And, it's really just continuing to do what we do, but constantly make it better and to get it out around the world so that more people can enjoy it. Because wine is essential, as we now know, in all of our markets. And there's a good reason for that. Because it's beautiful, and it's art, and it's family and friends. And I just want to thank you, Lawrence, for this opportunity to start my weekend a little early with some beautiful wine and great conversation, and with a new friend over in London. And
Absolutely.
Next time, we're going to meet in Montalcino at Castello Banfi. Okay? You and your listeners.
Go high five.
High five! Soon! Molto presto!
Thank you so much, Cristina. I really feel like through your knowledge and enthusiasm, we took a real tour of the Castello Banfi property, somewhere I sincerely hope to be able to visit at some point in the future. And I especially loved the bird impressions, certainly a first for the podcast. Do see below for the details of both wines that we tasted directly on the Louis Latour Agency's website. This includes all vintage details and links to the tech sheets. Below that, you can find details of the Castello Banfi website itself. And below that, the link that you can click to subscribe to the Louis Latour Agency's mailing list, remembering that this gives you the opportunity to win a case of 6 wines from the series. To subscribe to the podcast and to learn more about potentially sponsoring a series on interpreting wine, do head to interpretingwine.com. And of course, for information on the rest of this series and future series, I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, at Wine Podcast on Twitter, and email hello@interpretingwine.com. See you next time.